Traveling around southern Patagonia and enjoying its best spots means to necessarily cross the border between Argentina and Chile time and time again. We first crossed it at the windswept Paso Rio Don Guillermo, in the middle of the steppe, while traveling on a bus from El Calafate to Puerto Natales. Entering Chile is in many ways like stepping into a different dimension. The accent changes, people's looks and demeanor change, and boy does the cost of living change too. After 3 weeks in Argentina, it was a bit of a shock to suddenly start paying more than we do in Europe for food and amenities. We came to this part of Chile to visit the world-famous Torres del Paine National Park. I must say, this is one of the most spectacular places I've ever seen, with breathtaking landscapes and countless opportunities for outdoor activities. This region is known for its unpredictable climate and crazy winds. We had heard of people visiting the week before us who had rained for 5 days straight and couldn't see anything. My worst nightmare. But we couldn't have been luckier, enjoying 3 days of full sunshine in the park. As a base, we chose the tourist village of Serrano, located next to one of the park's entrances. We rented a no-frill yet insanely expensive cabin here. The views, though, were worth the price. This park boasts some of the most incredible scenery in the world, with a bulky massif rising dramatically from the flatness of the Patagonian steppe. The best known mountains here are the granite Paine Towers, as well as the equally impressive Cuernos, horns in Spanish, right next to them. It may not look like it, but these alpine landscapes are actually remarkably close to the ocean. The million islands and fjords dotting the Chilean coastline are just a few kilometers away, which is the reason it rains so much around here. The dirt roads crisscrossing the park call for careful driving, but make for delightful excursions. Pristine lakes, snowy peaks, meandering rivers, everything in Torres del Paine seems to come straight out of a postcard. It is almost too beautiful to be true, not to mention the close encounters. Much like the area around Chaltén, Torres del Paine is hiker's paradise. Hardcore trekkers come here to enjoy multi-day hikes like the W Circuit, but luckily there are also many day hikes that allow you to enjoy the park without giving up the comforts of a room with a private bathroom. If you visit Torres del Paine and you get a sunny day, don't wait around and use it to hike up to the Mirador Base Torres. You will want to see this with good weather. To reach it, you need to walk past forests, streams and canyons for 9 kilometers and then ascend for almost 1,000 meters. We ran into several fellow hikers, whose sweaty foreheads and red cheeks betrayed the fact that this trek is not necessarily for everyone. You need to be at least in decent shape to do it, especially for the last 45 minutes or so, where you need to scramble up a rocky incline with loose stones everywhere. When you get to the top though, you forget all the pain and sweat. The best part of this hike is that the towers are hidden until the very end, making this iconic view a surprise once you reach the finish line. Torres del Paine is full of viewpoints offering photo opportunity after photo opportunity. Nature here forces you to slow down, take it easy and stop repeatedly to find that perfect spot to contemplate, and snap a few shots. If it worked on a hot-tempered person like me, trust me, it will work on anyone. Another spot in the park that I loved is the Lago Grey, with its huge beach and a large glacier visible in the distance. There is a short hike that starts off at one end of the beach. We were happy with the amount of hiking we did, but there were a lot more excursions that we could have done. Some of them have to be pre-booked, while others are only available in the warmer months. In Torres del Paine, more than anywhere else in Patagonia, planning is essential.
So we made it to the Mirador. It was a pretty easy walk, very nice change from yesterday, which was not easy at all. And as you can see behind me, this is the beautiful Lake Grey. And over there is the Grey Glacier.
Located in the province of Ultima Esperanza, Last Hope, an apt name for such a remote place, the colorful town of Puerto Natales is the obvious starting point for park visitors, who come here to stock up on groceries before venturing into the Patagonian wilderness. Its name comes from the fact that the area was discovered by two German explorers on Christmas Eve, 1894. This is a pleasant little town, with good shopping and a cute seafront with beautiful sculptures where on sunny days people come out to frolic. We sat on a tiny pier and looked at the fishing boats sailing in the fjord to spend the afternoon. Back in Argentina, it was time to head south once again, from Calafate to Ushuaia. I had always imagined it as a small town, but the capital of Tierra del Fuego actually has a population of just under 60,000. It is squeezed between the Beagle Channel and the Marshall Mountains, the very beginning of the Andes, or the end, depending on how you look at it. Ushuaia certainly doesn't lack natural beauty.
And so we have finally arrived at the end of the world, Ushuaia, the southernmost city on the planet.
The city's fortunes rest almost entirely on its geographical position. People come here to explore the wilderness of Tierra del Fuego, but also to be in one of the most remote cities in the world. We are 2,500 kilometers south of Buenos Aires here, and 1,100 kilometers north of Antarctica. This place is far, and half of its appeal comes from that. The End of the World brand is everywhere in Ushuaia. There is an End of the World train taking tourists to the national park, an End of the World lighthouse, an End of the World museum, and countless restaurants and hotels carrying a variation of that same name. Not to mention the souvenirs. If you ever wanted an End of the World magnet or ashtray, you'll be spoiled for choice. Walking around downtown, I had the distinct feeling of being somewhere far and a little bit weird, a last frontier that reminded me of the towns in the Alaskan Panhandle. The streets of Ushuaia seem to be made for tourists. They are dotted with duty-free shops and restaurants serving the famous Centosha king crab and Patagonian lamb. There is even a hard rock cafe. Locals enjoy the highest levels of life quality in Argentina, but Ushuaia wasn't always this attractive. To populate it, towards the end of the 1800s, the Argentinian government decided to send to the region, at the time only inhabited by natives and a few European settlers, the only people who couldn't say no: prisoners. So, in 1902, the prison that had been operating on the remote Isla de los Estados was transferred here. At the time, there were only 40 houses in Ushuaia. A large new prison was built, with 5 wings that could hold up to 550 inmates. Among them were serial killers and even political prisoners. Visit the building, now part of the Museo Marítimo, to learn more about the history of Ushuaia. I particularly enjoyed the replica of the San Juan de Salvamento lighthouse, the lighthouse at the end of the world that inspired Jules Verne's novel. As fascinating as Ushuaia is, there is no doubt the best thing you can do here is to venture out of the city and explore its surroundings, from the Marshall Glacier minutes away from downtown to the huge Lake Fagnano some 50 kilometers away. Hop on one of the many boats offering cruises on the Beagle Channel and relive the experience of young Charles Darwin on his long journey on board the HMS Beagle, during which the Patagonian coastline was mapped for the first time. From the area around modern-day Ushuaia, the naturalists decided to travel north across Patagonia on horseback, coming into contact with the indigenous people of Tierra del Fuego, the Yamanas, and meticulously documenting the flora and fauna of the region. The findings greatly influence his most important work, The Origin of Species. Sailing on the Beagle Channel, named after Darwin's vessel, is simply delightful. The views of Ushuaia on one side and Chile's Navarino Island on the other are impressive, but most visitors take the cruise to sail around the iconic Les Éclaireurs lighthouse, also called, wrongly, the lighthouse at the end of the world. Many of the rocky islets dotting the Beagle Channel are home to large and rather smelly colonies of birds, as well as big groups of sea lions. Other excursions on the Beagle Channel take tourists further east to the super interesting Estancia Harborton. Estancias are large cattle ranches that are found everywhere in this part of the world. They played a key role in the colonization of Patagonia when the government encouraged immigration from Europe to populate this vast and empty region. In southern Patagonia, most pioneers came from England and Scotland. One of them was Anglican missionary Thomas Bridges. After years spent in a mission on Keppel Island in the Falklands, or Malvinas, in the late 1860s Bridges moved to Ushuaia. Over the years he learned the Yagan language and even compiled a 30,000-word dictionary. When he left the mission in 1886, the Argentinian government gave Bridges 200 square kilometers of land, where he established Estancia Harborton. He named it after his wife's hometown in Devon. His son Lucas chronicled the European colonization of Tierra del Fuego and its devastating effects on the Yagan and Selknam people in his book The Uttermost Part of the Earth. You can reach Estancia Harborton driving east of Ushuaia, much of the way on a dirt road. On a bright, sunny day, the farm looks idyllic, with its colorful English garden, whitewashed buildings with picturesque red roofs, and wooden piers framed by a gorgeous landscape of green hills and dark blue waters. However, it's not difficult to imagine the hardship that the Bridges must have endured to establish an estancia here. The harsh weather kept Harborton isolated from the rest of the region for long periods of time, but despite all odds, the Bridges family managed to establish a successful operation here. They raised cattle and sheep, and the vestiges of these activities are still visible in the many buildings of the estancia. A tour of Harborton comes highly recommended, as it offers an insight into the life of the pioneers who brought farming to the end of the world. Don't miss the Akatashun Museum, a laboratory and museum that carries out research on the wildlife of this remote region. Here you will have the opportunity to see the skeletons of dozens of creatures, from leopard seals to orcas and whales, collected over the years from animals found dead on the beaches of Tierra del Fuego. Just a few kilometers west of Ushuaia is the Tierra del Fuego National Park. You can take the famous train there, of course called the train of the end of the world, or drive. Walking along the sheltered coves of the park and through its unspoiled thick forest is sure to take you back a few hundred years, when the first Europeans laid eyes on these shores. It was Ferdinand Magellan who named this land Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire, after spotting the bonfires lit by the natives on the coastline. It was 1520, and not much has changed here, except for the fact that the Yamanas have all but disappeared, courtesy of European colonization. From time to time, you can still find an ancient shell mound where the natives used to eat, the sign of a civilization wiped out in the name of so-called progress. Examples of the negative effects of colonization on local societies and ecosystems abound all around the world, and Tierra del Fuego is no exception. The Selknam people, for example, were the victims of a genocide that caused their population to drop from 3,000 to 500 in just a decade. Whereas for the Yagans, who inhabited the area of the national park, it was the diseases imported by the European that proved fatal. Nature suffered from the arrival of the settlers as well. For instance, because of the introduction of non-native animals that came to represent huge threats to the local environment. The best known example is the Canadian beaver, introduced here in the 1940s to support the development of the fur trading industry, an experiment that later proved unsuccessful. With no natural predators, the rodents thrived and began to destroy entire forests to build their dams. They're now being culled. Of course, the main reason for coming to this park is nature. There is fantastic hiking in these magnificent woods. However, geography geeks and travel junkies like me are sure to appreciate Bahia La Pataya and its iconic sign, indicating the end of the famous Ruta Nacional 3, connecting Buenos Aires to the end of the world. It is literally impossible to go any further south from here, at least on land. It is exactly because I'm a geography geek that I was really disappointed we couldn't get to Cape Horn, where the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans meet. It was so close I could almost see it. At present, the only way to reach it is to take a 4-day luxury cruise on board the Australis, and even then, weather conditions and the fierce currents only make docking at the Cape possible about 70% of the time. I will just have to wait until I have a couple €1,000 to spare, plus airfare to Ushuaia, of course. We may have not been able to visit Cape Horn, but we sure found a way to enjoy our last day in Tierra del Fuego. Painfully early the following morning, we boarded yet another bus for our 12-hour journey to Punta Arenas, in Chile. We crossed the whole of the Isla Grande de Tierra del Fuego, traveling north before entering Chile near San Sebastián. Another 100 kilometers or so, and we boarded a ferry to cross the Strait of Magellan. We reached Punta Arenas a couple of days after violent protests erupted across Chile, with thousands of people taking to the streets to express their anger at the increasing inequality and cost of living in the country. The southern city wasn't spared the unrest, which kept us a little tense and somewhat spoiled our experience. Despite the chaos and the state of emergency, I quite enjoyed this city, historically one of the most prosperous ports in South America. Over the decades, Punta Arenas has reaped the benefits of its strategic location and welcomed large numbers of immigrants who came for the gold rush and ended up staying for the lucrative wool trading business. The city's opulent architecture is a clear reflection of its prosperity. It was a huge surprise to me to see such beautiful neoclassical buildings in one of the most southern cities on earth. I recommend walking up the hill to take in the views of Punta Arenas' colorful streets and houses. Bundle up and go for a stroll along the Costanera, the seafront facing the Strait of Magellan. It was the day before reaching Punta Arenas, right there on the legendary Strait of Magellan, that I found myself thinking again about that spirit of inquiry that the Yagan people had talked about, Maya Ku. As we sailed across the choppy waters, the violent waves hitting the ferry's bow and sending water meters high in the air, I bade farewell to Tierra del Fuego, which was getting smaller and smaller the closer we got to Punta Delgada. I was sad to go. There was so much more I wanted to observe and learn about this corner of the world. But then, all of a sudden, we spotted a black and white silhouette in the wake of the ferry. A Commerson's dolphin that performed a couple of acrobatics for us before disappearing in the waves. I decided to take it as a sign that I will be back one day.